Today, there is growing anxiety on the right over the results of a Texas special election that the Wall Street Journal editorial board summed up like this. How does a Republican lose by 14 points in a safe, conservative Texas state Senate seat that President Trump carried by 17 points in 2024? Answer: when there's a voter backlash against the Trump administration. Notably, it's mass deportation debacles.
Now, this is one of those pivotal moments in American politics where you can almost sense the earth shifting beneath everyone's feet. Democrats just flipped a Texas state Senate seat that was deep red for years. Yes, you heard that right. In a district that has consistently leaned Republican. They took a seat that Trump won by around 17 points in 2024 and turned it blue by a margin of about 14 points. To put that into perspective, we're talking about a total net swing of about 30 points toward the Democrats in a district that's been solidly in Republican hands for decades. 30 points in a suburban area of Fort Worth that was thought to be practically impenetrable for the Republican Party.
Alejandro, what propelled this victory? What can you tell us?
Thank you for having me. I think there's a couple of things on the ground here in Texas that people are still litigating. One is obviously the circumstances surrounding the election. It was on January, Saturday, and right after a cold snap here in Texas that affected campaigning and voting. But also it is the national discourse and the politics that we just heard about at the beginning of the segment.
Now let's talk about the Republican candidate who had quite the upset. She wasn't some random nobody who ran a lackluster campaign without backing. This was a candidate that Donald Trump had personally endorsed and praised as a true mega warrior. In the lead up to the election, he sent out multiple messages to his huge Texas support network, making it clear he wanted everyone to get out and vote for her. He really staked his personal reputation on this race in this district, and even with that strong endorsement and all the MAGA energy behind her, she ended up losing by a staggering 14 points.
The Republican candidate, Lee Wamskans, ran a campaign very much around MAGA issues, and Tyler Remick ran more of a quiet, on-the-ground campaign. And part of that was because he was financially outgunned by a lot. She had millions of dollars in contributions, and she had one contribution from one group that overshadowed all of Remick's contributions.
The person who came out on top was Taylor Rennett, a union leader and a first-time candidate who most folks outside the Fort Worth area hadn't even heard of until recently. He stepped into a district that was seen as a solid Republican stronghold, and yet he managed to pull off a stunning victory. It's really surprising to see the results coming from a district where Democrats have been struggling for ages. In this recent election, the Democrats snagged about 57% of the vote, while the Republican, who was backed by Trump, only managed roughly 43%. We're talking a solid 14-point win here.
A place like Fort Worth, Texas, when you knocked on doors, had people that had voted Republican their whole life decide to vote for you.
To me, it was simple. We had to focus on solutions, not partisan politics. Bringing communities together, that's what it's all about. In Texas, we look out for our neighbors, and that's exactly what we did with this campaign.
Not just some fluke or narrow escape. This is a district that Trump had completely dominated just 2 years ago during the presidential race. The reactions from both sides really highlight how big of a deal this is. On the Democratic front, folks at the DNC and strategists all around the country are practically celebrating. DNC Chair Ken Martin made a bold statement about how even in a district where Republicans had a 17-point advantage, they still couldn't pull off a win. This just goes to show that no Republican seat anywhere is safe as we gear up for 2026. It's not just the usual victorious chatter.
Today marks the one-year anniversary of my election as DNC chair, and I said this last year when I was elected, that when you organize everywhere, you can win anywhere. That's our motto at the DNC, and you've seen us doing that all year long. I mean, as you know, we talked about this the last time I was on your show. We've seen a historic overperformance throughout the country just in last year's elections, and it's because the DNC has taken a big bet.
This organization genuinely feels like they've cracked the code for competing in areas that were once considered impossible for Democratic candidates. On the flip side, the Republicans are responding with a mix of panic, blame, and a rare moment of soul-arching. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, a major figure among Texas Republicans, stated that this election should serve as a wake-up call for the party. He emphasized that Republicans can't take anything for granted anymore in any race or district. Lee W., Kins, the losing candidate, openly acknowledged that Democratic voters were really pumped and turned out in droves.
Well, first of all, you could never win the White House ever again, the electoral votes of New York, California, and Texas. So you have a one-party government forever. Secondly, we're not going to let them win Texas. But this was, in many ways, this was a good wake-up call, because what happened in Tarrant County, one of the reddest counties in the country, they just couldn't imagine, even in a special election, a Democrat could win.
While a lot of Republican voters simply chose to stay home on Election Day, what's striking to me is just how revealing all of this is. You know what's really entertaining about this whole situation? It's Donald Trump's reaction. When he backed this candidate, he clearly thought it would be an easy win, a shiny trophy to showcase how strong the MAGA movement still is in American politics. But then came the shocker. She didn't just lose. She got trounced by a staggering 14 points. Almost immediately, Trump tried to distance himself from the whole ordeal like he was sprinting away. He gave reporters a deadpan look and insisted he wasn't really involved.
Texas is about to turn purple. Texas is about to turn blue. But what does this really tell us?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, any Republican that doubles down on MAGA, and they're expected to because it's a loyalty test and Donald Trump demands that they do, is in trouble this year. I don't care how red your district is. This should be a wake-up call. I mean, this was a very, very, very red district, the reddest county in the country. And then just flip blue. I mean, what does that say?
Spinning it as just a local Texas race that had nothing to do with him or his movement. And guess what he actually said? I'm not on the ballot. You don't know whether or not it's transferable. Seriously, this is the same guy who endorsed her by name, called her a MAGA warrior in public, and urged millions of his followers to vote for her. Now that she's lost in a district he won by 17 points, he wants everyone to believe he had nothing to do with it. Honestly, who's buying that? Not the Democrats who pulled off a historic upset, not the Republicans who are starting to sweat over 2026, and definitely not the political analysts connecting this loss to a bigger, more troubling trend for Trump and the entire Republican Party as we move toward the midterm elections. So let's dive deeper into what actually went down in this Texas race and why it's a big deal beyond just one special election. This result didn't happen in a vacuum. It's linked to a larger trend that's been brewing for months, causing genuine worry among Republican strategists and elected officials all over the country. They've got reason to be scared about what's coming their way in 2026. Next year in November, we'll see the midterm elections come around. And it's really interesting how things are shaping up in Texas Senate District 9. This area encompasses a large part of the Fort Worth metropolitan region in Tarrant County, which is a typical suburban Texas setting filled with upper-middle-class neighborhoods. For decades, this kind of territory has been a stronghold for Republicans with hardly any serious competition from Democrats. The Republican seat here has been held for so long that many political observers can't even remember a time when it wasn't. Interestingly, the former Republican incumbent didn't lose the seat to a competitive rival. He chose to step down for a different position in state government, resulting in a special election to fill the vacancy. This situation should have been a straightforward hold for the Republicans, a complete formality. Really, there wasn't much expectation from either party that Democrats could realistically snatch this seat. The Republican candidate, a well-known conservative activist named Wamskans, had solid ties to the MAGA movement and even received a personal endorsement from Donald Trump himself. She enjoyed the full backing of the Texas Republican establishment with recognition in the district and a well-structured campaign behind her. With all the necessary resources, financial and otherwise, and Trump urging his millions of followers in Texas to vote for her, one would think she was a shoo-in. Yet, surprisingly, she lost by a whopping 14 points to a first-time Democratic candidate whom most people had barely heard of just 6 months prior. This result isn't one to overlook. The margin of defeat is incredibly significant when we think about the broader political implications. It's not just some close call where the Republican candidate lost by a point or two in a low turnout election where you might find some odd local factors to explain the outcome away. This loss by such a large margin indicates something quite different in the political landscape. In a recent special election in Texas, Democrats made quite the splash by flipping a district that Trump won by about 17 points during the presidential race. This resulted in a staggering swing of around 30 points toward Democrats in just one election. If you think about that for a second, applying this uniform 30-point shift across the entire national electoral map for the upcoming 2026 midterm elections would lead to an unprecedented congressional landslide for the Democrats, one that would be substantial to say the least. Now, I get it. It's important to note that we can't just take one special election result and assume it perfectly reflects what will happen in a general election in 18 months. Special elections have their quirks, unique dynamics, and specific local factors that don't always play out the same way in broader elections. But here's where it starts to get interesting. This Texas race is far from the only special election where Democrats have substantially outperformed expectations lately. Throughout Trump's entire second term, we've seen a consistent pattern where Democratic candidates are running well ahead of what the partisan numbers suggest they should be, while Republican candidates are often falling short of their expected performance. The Texas election is just the most shocking example we've seen of this trend. So, what's behind the sudden surge in Democratic support in regions usually considered strongholds for Republicans? According to many political analysts and campaign strategists diving into the data, it boils down to two key factors that are working together. First up, Democratic voters are showing remarkable energy and motivation right now, especially for this off-cycle period. They're angry and fired up, and it's definitely making an impact. It's honestly hard to wrap my head around everything that's been going on with the Trump administration lately. We've got court battles, executive overreach, and chaos that's been sparked by immigration controversies, all of which have created a whirlwind of turmoil and constitutional conflicts during Trump's second term. It's like all of this has turned into a huge motivator, firing up Democratic voters and getting them to turn out in numbers that are way above what you'd normally see outside of a general election cycle. Now, here's the thing that should really have Republican campaign strategists tossing and turning at night. MAGA voters just aren't showing up to the polls like they used to. The once reliable excitement that favored Trump and his candidates in competitive races has completely flipped on its head. In this Texas race, senior Republican leaders even had to admit publicly that a lot of their own voters simply stayed home on Election Day, despite Trump himself urging them to vote and the whole party reminding them how important this race was. Yet, their enthusiasm was just lacking. They didn't care enough to make that effort. This decline in voter enthusiasm actually ties back to some polling data from NBC News that pointed out issues within the MAGA political base back in late 2025. There are noticeable and measurable cracks forming. The number of Republican voters who strongly identify with the MAGA movement has been slipping, and those strong approval ratings for Trump among his core supporters have dropped by several points during his second term. The raw intensity and passionate energy that once made MAGA such a strong grassroots movement are clearly fading. What's interesting is how this decline in enthusiasm fits into the larger picture of Trump's overall slipping control during his second term. That defeat in Texas isn't a standalone event. It's connected to everything else that's been going wrong for Trump and the Republican Party lately. The courts have been dismantling his major policy initiatives left and right with more frequency and force. It's a tough spot for them, and the ramifications are certainly being felt. It's wild to see how things are unfolding lately. In a devastating ruling, federal judges have put a permanent stop to Trump's executive order that aimed to force states to follow his voting rules, or they'd risk losing their funding. His own appointees in the judiciary have even held his federal agencies in contempt of court, slapping them with financial penalties for not sticking to lawful court orders. And just when you think it can't get worse, the voters themselves in a deep red part of Texas are sending a clear and powerful message. It turns out that MAGA isn't the unstoppable political force that Trump and his closest supporters have been claiming it is. The strongman image that Trump has spent years building is starting to crack. The sense of political invincibility he's been carefully cultivating is fading away right before our eyes. You can really see this when looking at how Trump reacted to the loss in Texas. A confident leader who believes in the strength of his movement would never run away from an endorsement just because his candidate lost. He wouldn't brush off a 30-point swing against his party as just some insignificant local race that has nothing to do with him. But that's exactly what's happening. The reality is this Texas race shows what dwindling enthusiasm looks like when put to the test in an actual election. Trump backed the candidate, urged folks to vote, and yet Republican voters in a solidly red district just stayed home. Meanwhile, Democrats against all odds in such a heavily Republican area showed up in droves, swinging the results to a surprising 14-point victory that nobody really anticipated. So, let's break this down because the implications of what happened in Texas are huge and reach far in multiple directions. First and foremost, it's clear that Trump's political endorsement is officially losing its power. The recent election in Texas has shaken things up in a way that's hard to ignore. Just a year ago, getting an endorsement from Trump was like holding a golden ticket in Republican politics. Candidates were practically tripping over themselves trying to secure it, reworking their entire campaign strategies just to win his backing. They were convinced, and with good reason at the time, that his support would fire up the Republican base and lead to a solid turnout on Election Day. But the results of the recent race tell a much different tale about the power of a Trump endorsement in 2026. He threw his full weight behind a candidate, calling her a true MAGA warrior and using his large platforms to campaign for her right up to the finish line. Despite all that, she ended up losing by a whopping 14 points in a district he had won by 17 just 2 years prior. This isn't just a typical failed endorsement. It's a dramatic collapse in the influence of his endorsements that we rarely see from a sitting president. Now, Republican candidates nationwide, especially those eyeing competitive races in the upcoming midterms, are definitely looking at the Texas results and grappling with a tough question. Do they really want Trump's endorsement for their campaigns? If his backing can't even help a Republican in a solid red Texas district, what's it going to do for someone running in a truly contested area like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, or Wisconsin, where every vote counts even more? Considering the mounting evidence from Texas and various recent special elections where Democrats have outperformed expectations, the reality is beginning to set in. A Trump endorsement in a tight general election in 2026 could end up doing more harm than good for Republican candidates. And let's not forget the cracks in the MAGA base are growing and they're harder to ignore than ever. Every passing month, the gap in Republican voter support is becoming more apparent. The recent results from Texas serve as a stark reminder of what national polling has been suggesting for a while now. In a solidly Republican district, voters had plenty of reasons and opportunities to show up for a candidate endorsed by Trump, fully backed by the party. Yet, they just didn't bother to cast their ballots. Despite the endorsements, despite direct appeals from Trump, and despite the party emphasizing how crucial this race was, many simply stayed home on Election Day. This lack of enthusiasm is genuinely concerning. Grassroots apathy can spell disaster for any political movement in a democracy. Sure, you can tackle negative media coverage, face poor poll results, and deal with court defeats or pushback from institutions, but nothing is more detrimental than your own core supporters not feeling motivated enough to get off the couch and vote when it counts. That's a recipe for a political movement to spiral into oblivion. Now, let's talk about Trump's attempts to dodge responsibility for this loss. His effort to distance himself from a candidate he endorsed is not only transparent, but also makes his already tricky political situation even worse. Over the years, Trump has created a trap for himself. He's quick to take credit for victories, shouting from the rooftops whenever his endorsed candidates succeed. So when they lose, as they did this time by a whopping 14 points, he can't just pretend he had no part in it. Saying it was a minor local race doesn't cut it, especially when he's previously touted that same candidate as his personal mega warrior and encouraged supporters to vote for her. Political memory isn't as short as he might like to believe, and the evidence is out there for everyone to see. Each time he tries to distance himself, it only highlights the contradictions in his approach. The bottom line here is that what went down in Texas is more than just a rough night for Republicans during a special election. It stands out as a clear and loud warning that something has shifted in the political landscape, and it might be for the long haul. Democratic voters are buzzing with energy and motivation like we haven't seen in years. Meanwhile, you have Republican voters, particularly the MAGA crowd that Trump heavily relies on, looking pretty disengaged and unenthusiastic. This lack of enthusiasm is showing up at the ballot boxes, and it's making a difference in elections that truly matter. You can see Trump's endorsement power starting to crumble in real and visible ways. His ability to rally people just by being himself and having that brand loyalty is rapidly fading. With the midterm elections in 2026 just around the corner, Republicans really need to figure out how to tackle these concerning trends quickly.